Jack Milner stood at the edge of his porch, mug in hand, watching the low morning fog roll across his pasture. The dew clung to the fence posts like ghosts. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest Starbucks, peace came standard with the soil. That was the unspoken deal he'd made when he bought the old ranch, freedom in exchange for silence. But that morning, a noise shattered the stillness, the sharp crunch of tires on gravel. A white sedan, glossy and out of place, crawled up his drive. Jack squinted. No county seal, no familiar faces. The car stopped at his mailbox. The driver, a thin man in a navy polo, stepped out, placed something inside, then paused. He looked up toward the porch, toward Jack. Then, without a wave or word, he turned, got back in the car, and drove away. Jack walked to the mailbox. Inside sat a thick envelope, certified mail. The return address read, Crystal Ridge Community. Authority. He frowned. Crystal Ridge was that newly formed HOA 5 miles east. Fancy homes, artificial lakes, golf carts. Jack's ranch wasn't part of it. He made sure of that when he bought it. Still, the envelope had his name, and worse, it had his correct lot number. Inside was a formal letter on thick cream-colored paper. Notice of code non-compliance. Final warning. Dear Mr. Milner, our records indicate continued violations of Section 14B and Section 9E of the Crystal Ridge Design and Harmony Covenant, unauthorized fencing dimensions, excessive native brush growth, non-standard barn exterior, unapproved red metal paneling. These issues must be remedied within 10 business days to avoid enforcement action. Compliance is expected. Further review pending. Respectfully, Jonathan Vexler, President, Crystal Ridge HOA, read the letter twice, then a third time. This has to be a mistake, he muttered. He tossed the envelope on the kitchen counter and pulled out the folder containing his property documents. Crystal Ridge had been established 6 years after he purchased the land. There was no legal way they could apply HOA regulations retroactively to his acreage, unless something had changed without him knowing. He opened. His laptop went to the county assessor's site and typed in his parcel number. Everything looked the same, except for one detail. Under the zoning notes, a new entry had appeared 3 weeks ago. CRCV Overlay Jurisdiction. Overlay Jurisdiction? Jack whispered. He'd never heard of it, and no one had told him about it. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the letter. It rang 6 times before a cheery woman answered, Crystal Ridge HOA. This is Lori. Yes, this is Jack Milner. I received a notice about violations on my ranch. Oh, yes, Mr. Milner, she said brightly. You're listed as a Category B parcel now. You fall under the Expanded Visual Perimeter Authority. Visual perimeter? It means your property is visible from the new Scenic Drive project. The board voted to extend aesthetic control to surrounding areas deemed within community view. Jack gripped the phone. You mean to tell me that because someone driving past my land can see my fence, I have to follow your HOA's rules? There was a pause. Then, the board would be happy to review any appeals, but we strongly recommend beginning compliance as enforcement begins next week. Jack hung up. A cold knot tightened in his chest. Out here, you didn't ask for trouble, but sometimes it drove up your driveway anyway. The days after the letter arrived felt different to Jack. The peaceful rhythm of ranch life had been shattered, replaced by a growing unease. Every crack of a twig or rustle in the bushes seemed amplified. Even the usual wildlife, deer and quail, kept their distance, as if sensing something off. Jack had set out new game cameras along the northern fence line the day after his call to Crystal Ridge HOA. It was a precaution, he told himself, a way to keep an eye on the perimeter. But when he reviewed the first footage, his stomach dropped. A figure appeared just past dawn, wearing a fluorescent safety vest emblazoned with the words, Crystal Ridge Community Services. The man moved cautiously, scanning the brush, bending, low to examine the wire fence near the old irrigation pump. Then, before leaving, he pulled a small device from his pocket, some kind of scanner, and waved it slowly over the fence posts. Jack's brow furrowed. Why was someone surveying his property? What information could they be gathering? For the next few days, the visits became almost routine. Jack's cameras captured strangers in reflective vests, often accompanied by a small dog. They were quiet, but persistent, walking the fields, stopping near the barn, even peering inside his livestock pens. Jack caught glimpses of their faces on the grainy footage. Pale, unsmiling, and utterly focused. One evening, around sunset, Jack was working in the barn when he heard the faint buzz of a drone overhead. He looked up, startled, and saw a small quadcopter hovering near the roof vent, the exact spot where he kept a hidden safe behind a loose panel. His heart raced. Was someone spying on him? Was this about the alleged violations in the letter? Or something more sinister? The next morning, Jack found fresh tire tracks leading across the pasture toward the side gate. They were too recent to be from any delivery or neighbor. The soil was still soft from last night's rain. He followed the tracks cautiously, eyes scanning for clues. Near the gate, he spotted a pile of crushed wildflowers and snapped branches. Signs someone had forced their way through. He reached for his phone to call the sheriff's office, but hesitated. What could he say? Someone trespassed on my land wearing an HOA vest and flew a drone over my barn? The fear wasn't just about property rights anymore. It felt personal. Late that night, as the wind whispered through the oaks, Jack sat on his porch with a shotgun across his lap. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. You should reconsider compliance, Mr. Milner. We're watching. There was no sender ID. Jack's jaw tightened. Who was watching? And why? The peaceful ranch he'd built with his own hands was turning into a battleground. Every shadow seemed heavier, every sound sharper. The only certainty was that the fight was just beginning. Jack had barely caught his breath after the anonymous text when a new, more chilling threat appeared in plain sight. It was late afternoon when he left for the feed store, his mind racing with unanswered questions. The ranch needed tending, but, lately, every chore felt like walking through a minefield. The sun was warm but low, casting long shadows across the fields as Jack locked the barn behind him and climbed into his truck. When he returned nearly an hour later, his heart dropped. The side gate was open, and parked nearby was a dusty black pickup truck, one Jack didn't recognize. The truck's bed held several shovels, orange cones, and strange metal stakes. Worse, tire tracks cut deep into the soft, earth across his prized pasture, heading straight for the barn. Jack's boots thudded heavy against the ground as he hurried toward the scene. His hand instinctively moved to the pistol holstered at his side. The barn doors were wide open, and inside, two men and a woman were measuring the walls and fencing, snapping photos of his horse stalls and the weathered red metal siding. Jack's voice was low but fierce. "Hey, what the hell are you doing on my property?" The trio froze, exchanging quick glances. "We're here to assess compliance with the HOA regulations," said a man in a blue button-down shirt with a plastic ID badge clipped to his chest. "Mr. Vexler asked us to document the violations." Jack shook his head, anger rising like wildfire. "I never gave permission for anyone to enter. This is trespassing." The woman pulled out a clipboard, her voice cold. "The board extended its jurisdiction last month. We have legal authority to inspect." Jack's grip tightened on his pistol. "Legal authority? I've seen no court orders, no notices beyond that ridiculous letter. You're on my land illegally." Before anyone could respond, a shadow moved behind the barn. Jack's eyes narrowed. Another figure emerged, a man wearing a dark hoodie, holding a spray can. He knelt and marked a bright orange X on the barn's exterior wall. "What's that?" "For?" Jack demanded. The man smirked. "Property improvement plan. We'll be back soon to make sure you comply." Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't about rules. It was intimidation. He pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff's office. The line rang and rang before a young deputy answered. "Deputy, Ramirez, this is Jack Milner on the Milner Ranch. I have people trespassing and damaging my property. I need immediate assistance." There was a long pause. "Mr. Milner, the HOA says they're authorized under the new overlay jurisdiction. The sheriff's department treats this as a civil matter. We can't intervene unless there's a clear crime." Jack's voice dropped to a growl. "They're spraying paint on my barn. That's vandalism." "We'll send someone by to take a report," the deputy replied, voice neutral. Jack ended the call, staring at the orange X glaring back at him as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky blood red. Jack knew this was more than a property dispute. It was a war. That night, he patrolled the perimeter, flashlight cutting swaths through the dark. Every rustle of leaves made him tense. He double-checked the locks, counted his ammunition, and prayed that the law would catch up before the damage did. But deep down, Jack feared it never would. The night air was heavy and still, the kind of silence that presses into your bones. Jack sat on the porch, eyes sharp beneath the dim glow of a single bulb. The orange X on his barn wall seemed to mock him, glowing faintly in the moonlight. His phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. "Last chance, Milner. Comply or face consequences. No number, no signature. Just a cold warning." Jack's jaw clenched. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a threat. The next morning, he rose before dawn, tension tightening his chest like a vice. He moved through the ranch methodically, checking fences, gates, and the barn's foundation. Everything seemed intact, but he knew the damage wasn't always visible. As he headed toward the stables, a sudden movement caught his eye. Pinned to the rough wooden wall, nailed crudely to the beam, was a stack of yellowed papers. Jack's heart hammered. He grabbed them carefully, scanning the words. Final notice. Immediate compliance required. Failure to comply with the Crystal Ridge HOA directives will result in legal action and forced remediation. This is your last warning. Board President Jonathan Vexler. The letters were old, the edges weathered, but the threat was fresh. Whoever nailed them wanted Jack to know they weren't bluffing. He stared at the papers, a flicker of anger igniting inside him. Jack wasn't a man to be pushed around. That afternoon, as a storm rolled in, he noticed something else. The horses were restless, snorting and pawing the ground. Approaching the corral, he saw fresh cuts on the fencing wire, twisted as if deliberately tampered with. Someone was trying to make him look careless, maybe dangerous. His blood boiled. Jack paced the yard, searching for a witness or clue. Nothing. The storm grew louder, thunder rolling across the sky like distant drums. The wind picked up, shaking the loose boards of the barn. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. A tree limb, heavy and soaked from the rain, crashed through the corral fencing, narrowly missing one of the horses. Jack's hands shook as he moved to secure the fence. The timing was too suspicious to be natural. The next morning, Jack went to the sheriff's office to file a detailed complaint. Deputy Ramirez listened, taking notes, but wore a grim expression. "Mr. Milner, I understand. This is tough, but as of now, nothing here meets criminal thresholds. It looks like property disputes, harassment maybe. We'll increase patrols, but there's only so much we can do." Jack's fists clenched. "What do I do when they cut my fences and nobody stops them?" Ramirez shrugged. "Document everything. Keep evidence. We'll do what we can." Jack left the station feeling more alone than ever. Back at the ranch, dusk settled fast, turning shadows into threats. That night, a silhouette appeared by the barn, a figure holding a flashlight, moving slowly, methodically. Jack stayed hidden, heart pounding in the dark. The stranger stopped, knelt, and taped a small envelope under the barn's eave. Jack waited until the figure vanished into the night, then crept forward and retrieved the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed, "Consider this your last warning. Compliance is not optional. No signature, no explanation. Just a cold promise that the invasion was far from over." Jack folded the paper and stared into the darkness, knowing the battle for his ranch had only just begun. Jack Milner knew he couldn't sit back and wait for the next trespass. Every day brought new threats: covert surveillance, vandalism, and those chilling anonymous warnings. But now Jack was ready to turn the tables. He had spent the past week preparing a plan. A decoy shed rigged with hidden cameras and audio recorders, stocked with fake compliance documents that made it look like he was ready to submit. The place was bait, a trap for whoever was illegally entering his property. The afternoon sun hung low as Jack watched from a concealed spot behind the main barn, his eyes scanning every movement. The ranch was quiet, but he knew better than to trust silence. Hours passed. Then the first sign, a crunch of gravel. 3 figures appeared from the tree line, the unmistakable silhouettes of the Crystal Ridge HOA president Jonathan Vexler, 2 contractors Jack had seen lurking around, and a man Jack didn't recognize. The stranger carried a clipboard and wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. Jack's breath caught. This was it. The group approached the decoy shed, moving cautiously. Vexler held up a legal-looking envelope and waved it like a badge. Jack held his phone steady, the hidden recorder picking up every word. "All right," Vexler said, voice sharp. "We're here to document the final stages of compliance. Make it quick." The contractors spread out, measuring walls and snapping pictures of the fake paperwork pinned inside. The stranger knelt and examined the floorboards, tapping lightly, then pulled out a small canister, some kind of chemical spray. He started marking spots on the wood with a thin black marker. Jack's pulse hammered as he observed silently. The trespassers had no right to be here, and they knew it. This wasn't a simple inspection. It was a blatant invasion. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens sliced through the afternoon calm. Jack smiled grimly. He'd called in a favor. Within minutes, several sheriff's deputies arrived, surrounding the group. Vexler's confident smile faltered. "Gentlemen, you're trespassing on private property," the lead deputy said firmly. "You're under investigation." Vexler sputtered. "We have authorization from the HOA. This land falls under our expanded jurisdiction." Jack stepped forward, voice steady but cold. "You don't have my permission. You broke into my property, and I have the recordings to prove it." The deputies began collecting evidence, cameras, phones, documents, while the trespassers protested, their arguments sounding desperate and hollow. But then, the man in the hoodie, who had remained quiet until now, did something unexpected. He pulled off the hood, revealing a face Jack recognized from his earlier footage. The same man who had flown the drone over the barn roof. "I'm Mark Ellis," he said, voice shaking slightly. "I was hired as an independent investigator. But what I found was worse than I imagined. There are forged deeds and fake boundary maps tying this HOA to a shell company trying to claim private lands illegally. The courtroom was going to have a field day with this." The deputies exchanged looks, and Vexler's smug demeanor collapsed entirely. Jack felt a surge of vindication. This wasn't just a fight over fences anymore. It was uncovering a conspiracy. As the trespassers were led away in handcuffs, Jack turned to his attorney's number on his phone, fingers steady despite adrenaline pounding in his veins. This was the moment the battle shifted. The fight for the ranch was far from over, but Jack had the upper hand now. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Jack Milner sat quietly, waiting for the hearing to begin. The illegal trespassing case against Crystal Ridge HOA had turned into something much bigger, a sprawling web of deceit and corruption no one had expected. Jack's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Torres, had been digging into the HOA's records for weeks. Today, she was ready to lay bare the truth. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. Rachel rose first, clicking through a presentation that displayed documents and photos of forged deeds, false surveys, and shady corporate filings. Each piece painted a grim picture. The HOA leadership had been quietly expanding their jurisdiction by falsifying county records and coercing neighboring landowners into signing away rights. The most shocking revelation was the shell company, Crystal Horizon Holdings, that held ownership of large swaths of private ranches, including Jack's. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice steady but commanding, "this is not merely an overreach by a homeowners association. It is an illegal scheme to seize private property under false pretenses, backed by fraudulent documents and intimidation." Jonathan Vexler's face paled as evidence was laid bare. Emails showing coordination with local officials, attempts to silence dissent, and even threats against property owners who resisted. Jack watched, heart pounding. He thought of the nights on his porch, the broken fences, the anonymous threats. Now it all made sense. The courtroom murmured as Rachel revealed a video recording. The hidden camera footage from Jack's decoy shed, capturing Vexler and his associates illegally entering the ranch, marking the barn and plotting their compliance. Enforcement. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Mr. Vexler, how do you respond to these allegations?" Vexler stammered, These are misunderstandings. We acted in the community's interest." "But under false authority," Rachel interrupted, "and with threats and trespass." The judge nodded gravely. "This court finds the evidence compelling." For Jack, the courtroom was a battlefield where truth cut through lies like a knife. After hours of testimony and cross-examination, the judge announced a preliminary ruling. The HOA's expanded jurisdiction was null and void, all forced compliance orders were rescinded, and a full investigation into the fraudulent practices of Crystal Ridge, HOA and Crystal Horizon Holdings would proceed, but the bombshell came next. The court is imposing a fine of $680,000 against the Crystal Ridge HOA for unlawful entry, harassment, and fraudulent practices, the judge declared. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, tempered by a new resolve. This was just the beginning of holding them accountable. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Jack, eager for comment. He stood firm, his voice steady. "This fight was never just about me. It's about protecting every landowner's rights against bullying and corruption. No one should ever have to fight this hard to keep their home." As the sun set behind the courthouse, Jack realized how much had changed, and how much was still at stake. The conspiracy had been uncovered, but the road ahead was long. There were promises to keep, fences to repair, and justice to see through. But for the first time in months, Jack allowed himself a moment of hope. The victory in court was a milestone, but Jack knew the fight was far from over. The wounds left by the illegal invasions, threats, and harassment ran deep, and Crystal Ridge HOA's influence still lingered like a shadow over the community. Back at the ranch, Jack was fixing a fence post when the sound of a vehicle approaching caught his attention. He looked up and saw a dusty pickup truck pulling into his driveway. The driver stepped out, a woman in her mid-30s wearing a dusty work jacket and a warm but serious expression. "Jack Milner?" she called. He wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded. "That's me. I'm Emily Grant. I work with the state's Real Property Rights Commission," she said, extending her hand. "I've been following your case. You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." Jack shook her hand, curious. "What can I do for you?" Emily smiled. but there was steel in her eyes. "I'm here to help. After your case made headlines, we launched a wider investigation into similar HOA abuses across the state. Turns out Crystal Ridge isn't the only one involved in these shady practices." Jack raised an eyebrow. "So you think there's more to this?" Emily nodded. "A lot more. There are dozens of reports like yours, illegal trespasses, forged documents, intimidation tactics. We're building a task force to expose the full network behind these schemes." Jack felt a spark of hope. That's exactly what I need. These people have been tormenting me, and it's time they faced real consequences. Emily reached into her truck and pulled out a thick binder. "We've already started compiling evidence, but we need eyewitnesses, more documentation, people who are willing to stand up." Jack's mind raced. "I have footage, photos, and all the records from my attorney. I'll help however I can." Emily smiled warmly. "Good, because this fight isn't just yours anymore. It's about every landowner who's been bullied or threatened." For the first time in weeks, Jack felt less alone. As Emily helped him organize the evidence, Jack noticed something unusual. A small device clipped to her jacket. It was a discreet recorder, probably used for interviews and collecting testimony. He also caught a glimpse of a faded badge peeking from her wallet, a government seal. They worked late into the evening, piecing together timelines, matching documents, and identifying potential witnesses. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out, plunging the ranch into darkness. Jack's muscles tensed instinctively. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Emily nodded, pulling out a flashlight. "Could be a coincidence, but after what you've been through, I wouldn't rule out sabotage." Jack grabbed his shotgun and moved cautiously toward the barn. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of crickets. As they checked the perimeter, Jack noticed fresh footprints near the side gate. Too deliberate to be accidental. "Someone's watching us," he muttered. Emily's voice was steady. "Then we'll make sure they don't get away with it." Together, they set up a series of motion sensors and cameras around the property, a digital fortress designed to catch any intruders. As the night deepened, Jack realized Emily was more than an investigator. She was an unexpected ally, a lifeline in the growing storm. The battle against corruption was far from over, but with new forces at his side, Jack felt ready to face whatever came next. The nights on the Milner Ranch had grown quiet, but Jack knew better than to trust silence completely. Since Emily Grant joined the fight, momentum had shifted. The evidence collected wasn't just enough to hold Crystal Ridge HOA accountable. It was explosive. Weeks later, the grand courtroom buzzed with energy as the full trial began. The prosecution laid out a damning case: forged documents, illegal land seizures, intimidation, and harassment, all backed by reams of proof and eyewitness testimony. Jack sat with Emily and Rachel, feeling a fierce mix of exhaustion and determination. The air was thick with tension as Jonathan Vexler and his accomplices took the stand, their confident smirks replaced by nervous glances. Vexler tried to spin the narrative, claiming he acted for the community's best interest. But the judge and jury weren't buying it. One by one, landowners from nearby ranches testified, recounting their own stories of trespass, vandalism, and threats, each echoing Jack's nightmare. Midway through the trial, a dramatic surprise unfolded. Emily stood and handed the judge a flash drive. "Your Honor, we have intercepted communications proving the involvement of a local politician in facilitating the HOA's illegal expansion." Gasps filled the courtroom. The evidence revealed secret meetings, bribery attempts, and backdoor deals designed to shield Crystal Ridge's corruption from scrutiny. The judge's expression hardened. "This changes everything." The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. The trial had just turned into a much larger scandal. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced the HOA board members and their collaborators to hefty fines, mandatory restitution, to affected landowners, and referred several individuals for criminal prosecution. Jonathan Vexler received the harshest penalties, including a suspended license to practice law and a significant personal fine. As the gavel struck, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the story wasn't over yet. Back at the ranch, Jack and Emily were reviewing the case files when the phone rang. Emily answered cautiously. "Mr. Milner, this is Deputy Ramirez. We found something at the old board office, a hidden ledger detailing offshore accounts tied to Crystal Horizon. Holdings." Jack's eyes widened. "This could lead to the recovery of millions," Ramirez continued. "We're coordinating with federal authorities now." Jack and Emily exchanged a look. The corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Jack stood on his porch, looking out over his land. Finally peaceful. He knew the fight had tested every ounce of his strength. But justice had been served. The ranch was his sanctuary again, and no one would ever take it from him.